Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on planet Earth right now. Thank you for joining the Planet Fashion Masterclass Part 3. Today we'll be talking to you about fabric to footprint, and we're going to go in a really interesting and interactive session about demystifying carbon accounting for fashion. And what we will do is provide you, the audience, a little bit of time, because we know it's, for some people across Europe now, it's probably your lunch break. So we'll give everyone around a minute or two before we begin. Just some house rules, because this is not a session where we're all in a real life building. I don't expect on our side any fire testing events or any fire alarms. So if you do hear anything, it will be a real life emergency, but hopefully nothing will happen and the event will go very smoothly. So again, thank you everyone who's joining from whichever part of the world you're joining from. We will be beginning the event imminently. And just as a reminder to all the participants, so for today's session, we'll be using Slido for audience interaction. We have quite a few polls where we want to learn from you, as well as you learning from us. So do please register and use the Slido link. And actually on Slido, we will be recording the Q&A and all of your questions that we will leave some time in the end to go through. And we have people from Paris, Barcelona, Berlin. Okay, so fairly, there, Bangladesh. Okay, I don't know what time it is in Bangladesh, but thank you for joining us. We're really excited to have you. And because we're at 2 minutes past, what I would suggest is we kick off the event and we'll let people join throughout the session. 4 p.m. Well, good afternoon to you and thank you for joining. So thank you for everyone. We're going to have a fantastic session where we will have our resident scientific experts in Plan A talk to you about demystifying carbon accounting for fashion. So we have two amazing speakers today representing the team of experts that I personally have the pleasure to work with in Plan A every day. So the first speaker for today's session will be Arianna De Bellis. She's a sustainability professional, LCA practitioner, and the carbon accounting lead in Plan A. Ari graduated with a master's degree in environmental engineering and has spent her career providing expert advice and solutions for hundreds of clients across different industries, with their environmental emissions management, of course. And Ari has worked in fashion, automotive, banking, financing, and software sectors, helping clients on their sustainability journey. And legend has it, Ari's first word in Italian back in the day was LCA. So the culture of sustainability is ingrained within her character, which you'll witness throughout the presentation today. And the second speaker that we have is Larry De Souza. Larry's also an environmental engineer and has created software solutions for automotive production, waste management, fashion, and food manufacturing industries to help count, record, and reduce emissions across their supply chain. And Larry is, of course, one of our carbon accounting experts in the team. And finally, the person talking to you, who's me. I'm your host, Dr. Dzhiordzhio Nalzdiev. And to finish that trifecta of engineering nerds that we have in Plan A, I should disclose that I'm also an environmental engineer. And together with the rest of our experts in the sustainability solutions team, we ensure the scientific integrity and technical rigor of the Plan A platform. So thank you all for attending the event today, and I hope we have a really engaging and productive conversation. I must say, we want to learn from you as you learn from us. And as a reminder to everyone who's just joined us, we'll be explicitly using Slido for the Q&A and audience interaction. So please use your phone, laptop, Apple AR, VR, whatever digital device you have available to connect to Slido, and we will use that for our main interactions. Lovely. So I would suggest we begin the masterclass. Larry, next slide, please. So to begin this masterclass, we wanted to tell you a little story about a woman who lived thousands of years ago. And before I pass on to Ari and Larry, we will learn from the pioneers of the fashion sustainability industry, and we're going to look at how clothes were actually made in ancient Egyptian times. So let's transport us back a few millennia ago. The main character in our story is Anksunamun, and what we're going to do in the next few minutes is look at a few months of her life and what it really looked like a few thousand years ago. So what Anksunamun used to do in the morning is spend it in the fields of flax. So early in the morning, Aung San Suu Kyi would walk through the lush green flax fields near the Nile River, examining the plants under the golden sunrise. And her friends and co-workers prepared the tools ready for the harvest. And the flax harvest was imminent, so Aung San Suu Kyi knew that the timing had to be absolutely perfect, because early harvest would mean weak fibers. And I have a few props where you can see actual flax fibers. So if you had it in real life, I would pass it over to the audience. So imagine you're holding a piece of flax in your hands at the moment. But early harvest would mean weak fibers, while a late harvest could lead to overripe and very brittle stems in a way. So her decisions as a pioneer sustainability manager, CEO, and also worker, of course, guided by nature, were the first steps in creating a sustainable product. So the next step in her journey was to actually harvest the flax by the Nile River. So using hand tools, Aung San Suu Kyi carefully uprooted the flax plants, preserving the roots to keep the fibers intact. And what she did is very carefully and gently pull the plants from the earth so that the roots would stay intact. And she insisted on using traditional methods with no sharp blades because that could actually damage the plants. And she intrinsically knew that this not only maintained the quality of the fibers, but also allowed them to replant the seeds, ensuring the sustainability of future crop production. And as they worked, Aung San Suu Kyi would actually share stories of her own ancestors who had passed down these sustainable practices through generations, always mindful of the earth that sustained them. We then move to the retting process. So Aung San Suu Kyi soaked the flax in water, and this is a process called retting, which would effectively separate the fibers from their woody stalks. So she chose a slow retting process, relying on the natural action of the river's microbes. And this method took longer, but it did preserve the quality of the fibers and was gentler on the environment. And if you're really interested in the science behind this process, like we are, and some of the science behind that Aung San Suu Kyi instinctively knew, but didn't realize was quite happening or couldn't explain it, you can also follow the link below for the scientific article explaining it in detail, and we'll share the slides after the session. So if, like us, you love deep diving into scientific papers on how things actually work in nature, you can go and read that paper following the event. And finally, the most important and personally my favorite part, the weaving. So we can see on the next photo, Aung San Suu Kyi weaving and working hard in her workshop. And each piece of fabric was crafted with care and designed to last for many years, because she believed in creating quality over quantity, knowing that a well-made garment would be valued and cherished, and also reduce the need for constant replacement. She selected natural dyes from local plants, avoiding any harmful substances that could pollute their precious river. And each piece of fabric she crafted with care turned into a beautiful garment that her fellow men and women could wear proudly, value, and cherish. And actually, you might have, for the very eagle-eyed audience members at the moment, you might have noticed that there was a different woman that represented Aung San Suu Kyi in each of those steps of the process. And the reason you saw a different woman is that because this was the day-to-day experience for millions of women throughout history, effectively creating handcrafted pieces of art that you can really now go and see in the British Museum if you ever visit London, where some of us are actually based. And what we really wanted to share in this story is that we think Egyptians actually pioneered what we would coin circularity by default, as the fabric from some of the clothes that they manufactured was later used to cover mummies. And if you ever watched the movie The Mummy, which was one of my favorite movies growing up, sometimes those beautiful creatures reappeared and were later recycled back into museum artifacts, effectively closing the full circular system. So you might be wondering, where you're sitting in Bangladesh, Copenhagen, Paris, Berlin, why did we start the masterclass with this short history lesson? And the reason is, well, whilst the women were not necessarily counting carbon or could really articulate the science behind it, their operations were fundamentally sustainable. And if we look at climate lessons from ancient Egypt, particularly at times of famines and floods, we can really find that social inequality and environmental changes were some of the biggest factors contributing to that ancient society's downfall, or parts of it, depending on your historic views. And the difference between a few millennia ago and now is that science has evolved so that it helps us measure, monitor, and model the impact we have on the planet, and we can actually do something about it rather than just learning to live with the consequences. Which brings us to the real detailed, technical, and interesting part of our discussion today, which is how are emissions counted and accounted for. And before I pass on to our expert speaker, Ali, I wanted you all to imagine that Aung San Suu Kyi was a sustainability manager today. So if we can go to the next slide. And what I invite everyone sitting on their screen now is to write your answer in Slido and imagine what if Aung San Suu Kyi was living in modern society today and working as a sustainability manager in a fashion company, what would be her biggest challenge? And for every question that we have on the screen, we'll give the audience around 1 minute. So do please share your thoughts. It's an open, I can already see cost pressures, of course. Yeah, it was true for ancient Egypt. Data collection, yes. Back then, data collection was quite complicated, as you might imagine. Supply chains, great shout. We will actually cover some of those elements in the slides going forward. Mental health, also quite critical in modern day society. And probably Aung San Suu Kyi didn't consider mental health as one of the most important factors today, but you're right, in today's modern corporate complex world, it is true. Stakeholder engagement, mass production. We're seeing some really great concepts and themes emerging, so thank you for the participation. She wouldn't have oversight or ownership of each part of the production process. That's a brilliant point. And actually, on this point, I shall move on the discussion and pass over to Ari, who is going to discuss some of the themes that are already emerging in our conversation. Ari, over to you.
Thank you so much, Giorgio, and hello, everybody. So yes, thank you so much, Giorgio, for this story. And as you can imagine, technologies have evolved quite a bit to modern times. So during the rest of the masterclass, we will be diving into Scope 3 emission according to what is reported to Greenhouse Gas Protocol. We crunched some numbers, analyzing more than 50 fashion brands. And what you see in this graph is what is the typical profile of emissions of a fashion company. What stands out, of course, is how much Scope 3 is so much higher than Scope 1 and 2, so much so that Scope 1 and 2 are barely visible. This does not mean that these categories are not important, but definitely let us understand why most fashion brands focus a lot of their effort and resources into assessing Scope 3. If we zoom even further into the Scope 3 subcategories, the proportion of these emissions is dominated by the category 1, the purchased goods and services. For the typical fashion companies, these emissions would be around 74% of total Scope 3 emissions, but could also go up to 99% of Scope 3, depending on how business is structured. This is why we think it's very important in this class to go and dive deep into what this means. So in this image, you can see that when we talk about Scope 3 category 1, what are we actually talking about? This is the category, as we said, of purchased goods and services. And in general, usually what is included are both goods, so tangible products, but also services, so intangible products. Of course, right now we will focus on the tangible products because this is what is extremely relevant in this case. And here is where we focus on the emissions coming from the procurement of garments, textiles from your suppliers. That this is what will be reported in this category. In sustainability assessment terms, where we talk about a product, you will hear the terms cradle, gate, grave. This is how we describe the phases of a life cycle. Specifically, what is accounted in this category is the upstream emissions, or so-called cradle to gate. These are the emissions coming from the production of the products purchased during the reporting year that is being assessed, and everything from the raw material extractions, the following processing of them, the transportations, the waste, everything that happens until the product is out of the manufacturer's so-called gates. These are the steps that are analyzed to understand the emissions reported in this category. And the level of analysis that we could go through are different, and this is exactly what we are gonna go through. So according to the Dzhiordzhio protocol, we have three main options plus another option that is a mix of two of them. And we can see an overview of them right now, and we will go into even more details later. Going from less accurate to more accurate, the first method that you could use is the spend-based method. So using this method is really straightforward, and it's easily implementable through data from the finance department. However, there are many assumptions behind what is happening in real life in the EEIO data that are leveraged for this method, and we will see what it means later. Then, going a bit up in the accuracy level, we can follow the materials and use the average data method. This requires data on weight of materials, quantities, type of materials, and products. So you could calculate the associated emissions with your purchases. And this is way better than spend-based method because the coverage of the emission factors used is much greater and more accurately represents what your company is doing on the ground. It is though still based on industry averages data. Then we go to the ideal method, the most accurate one, is the supplier-specific method. This is, as I said, is the ideal one for carbon accounting, and the underlying principle is that you track the materials or garment coming directly from your supplier that you purchase it from, using primary data that are really specific to your use case. And as I mentioned, there is a fourth method, which is called hybrid method, and this is a mix of supplier-specific and average-based method, because not always is possible to have totally primary data using only the specific supplier-specific method. And we are going to understand what it means to use each one of these methods. But first, I would be extremely curious to know what is your experience. If you already have gone through this, using these methodologies, what is the method that you have used? Or if you're gonna use them in the future, what do you think would be the method that you would use? Or if you have not at all measured your emissions, let's see. Very interesting, okay. Some of you are answering average-based, supplier-specific, wow, amazing. Some of you have not yet measured your Scope 3 emissions. It is very interesting to know, because then we will also compare your answers to a small analysis that we have also performed in-house. Nice, average-based and hybrid. Hybrid, okay. Let's see if some more answers are coming in. The results change quite a bit with your answers coming in. Let's see, okay. I see, so hybrid method is definitely at the top, then average supplier. And I would say, if we check the next slide, this is quite aligned with what we have seen. So we did a small analysis on a sample of 17 very large brands. These are the biggest brands in the world, with revenues between 500 million and 6 billion per year. And as you can see, this is quite aligned with the results of our poll, so I'm happy to see that. Spend-based likely is the least used one, while average-based is used by quite a few. And the most used one is the hybrid method, so a mix of primary data and secondary data, which is really, really ideal. Okay, I think now we are ready then to really dig deep into what it means. So bear with me if this feels too technical, but we really want to shed some light on what happens behind the scene. So spend-based data, I feel like there is a lot of mystery around this, because it's really very interesting to see how can we go from just the monetary spending to understand the CO2 emissions of something associated with that. So spend-based data is based on the environmentally extended input-output data. Sorry, this is like quite mouthful name, but these data are based on models that shows how industries are connected to each other and how their activities impact the environment. It tracks the flows of materials and services between different sectors. This data track the flow of goods and services across industries and quantify the associated environmental impacts, such as resource use, emissions, and waste. This helps us understand how much environmental harm is caused by producing everyday products and services also, and these are accountable through the spending associated with it, making them valuable for sustainability assessment, policy making, and life cycle analysis. But as we said, these data, these models are full of assumptions by definitions. And this is a great method for a first assessment, for a screening, for understanding where your company is. But definitely, if you want to go more in depth, the next step would be to go with either the average-based method or the supplier-specific one. So we are showing you these methods in the same slides because they operate on the same principles. Activity data is used to calculate the emissions associated with each step of the life cycle of the product. And the difference is that the average-based one uses emission factors based on industry averages, activity data. We define those by using lifecycle assessment databases, lifecycle assessment softwares, and secondary research in order to allow who does not have primary data to understand their emissions nonetheless. While on the other end, the supplier-specific method entails data collection happening directly from your supplier. And this makes it specific to your business. And you can think of this as a virtual representation of your supply chain, where we calculate the real-life emissions associated with every step along the way. That being said, we're also aware that the life cycle of this product goes through different years, and not always is possible to collect primary data from each one of these suppliers along all the tiers. This is why the hybrid method, it's a good compromise, let's say so, where the primary data are not available, the average method is able to cover the gaps and actually provide a very useful and insightful analysis. Accounting for your emissions, of course, is not always going to be easy, and we are aware that it requires effort and a lot of resources from your side. This is why there are experts like us guiding you through this journey. But I would say that the reward of doing this work, it's really being able to understand where are the most impactful steps of the processes, where you can really take action and see the differences in what like taking actions will show you as a next step. And very important to know that next, what my colleague Larry will show you is that the result of these methods are not always straightforward. It's a bit of a small spoiler. But it will be very interesting now to go and dig to what it means to actually use this method. And I will leave it to Larry.
Thank you, Arianna, for the insights on calculation methods. So I would like to go back to the story that Dzhiordzhio had presented on Ansuk Namun. So now let's imagine Ansuk Namun is the head of marketing and business intelligence. So she has lots of data about the financial performance of the product she's selling and her target market. So she works at Mummies Limited, and the company has business intelligence data on which products sell the most. Fast forward a few months, a new CEO has been hired for the company, and they have a real drive for sustainability growth. And now the CEO wants to set SBTi targets, science-based targets, and reduce the business emissions by 25%, because that's what they achieved in the previous company in 2 years. Now, Ansuk Naman is really passionate about sustainability and is successfully promoted to the head of sustainability. Now, her main task is to select which of these products that I'm going to show you the company should start selling. But the problem is that she doesn't really have any sustainability data on these products. So the question that Ansuk Namun and you are facing is, which of these products? The first one is a leather jacket made in France. The second is a polyester dress made in China. Or the third one is a cotton t-shirt made in India. So which of these products have the highest emissions? Now, what I would like you all to do is to share your thoughts and vote on Slido. Which of these products do you think are most likely to have the highest emissions? So yes, we already have some votes here. So the leather jacket is currently leading, followed by polyester dress and cotton t-shirt. You all think are equally emitting. So leather jacket is still leading. Okay, and now we have the polyester dress being in the second place, whereas leather jacket is still in the first place. Okay, the polyester dress is catching up and it's quite close to the leather jacket, a difference of 6%. Okay, now it's equal. Okay, great. Okay, now we're back to the leather jacket. Okay, let's give a few more seconds for everyone to cast their votes. Okay, let's say the leather jacket has the highest emissions. It's produced in France. The polyester dress is from a supplier from China in the second place, and the cotton t-shirt produced in India has the lowest emissions. Like all scientists, we usually build the suspense and tell you it's complicated. So depending on whether you are an optimist or a pessimist, you are either all wrong or you are all right. So let's explain. The emissions are a bit like Schrodinger's cat, and we don't know what they are until we look inside the box. As we said previously, Ansuk Namun did not really have any sustainability data gathered, so she is in a position of not really making the right decision and like really guessing which product would have the highest emissions. So let's look a bit more into depth into these three products. So we have prepared a few scenarios. So what we did is we modeled the emissions associated with these products using different methodologies, which are the three methodologies that Arianna explained, which is the spend-based methodology, the average-based, and the supplier-based. And the data quality and the assumptions for the product, we have also done some assumptions here. The final product is exactly the same. So it's jacket, dress, and a t-shirt. However, we make changes between the methods for each of these products about how it's made and how it's accounted. And that is why you would see there is a difference in emissions. So as you can see on the screen, you're all right, because there is a scenario where whichever product you select, it has the lowest or the highest emissions, depending on the methodology. This is why it's complicated. So what Ansuk Naman is about to realize is that when she faces business decisions, data granularity and availability is key. So this is the golden dust that allows her to truly understand what the impact that any of her products have on the real world out there. So with the jacket, we can see that it has a lower footprint compared to polyester dress and the cotton t-shirt in majority of the cases in the chart. And for the leather jacket, what I'm referring to is specifically the supply-based method, which is the green bar on the graph. So let's have another poll here where you would try to now guess what do you think are the assumptions that we did, which proves that the leather jacket can technically have lower emissions than a cotton t-shirt and polyester dress. Because from the previous slide, we saw that most of you said that leather jacket would have the highest emissions, followed by polyester and cotton. But with our model, we are saying leather jacket can have technically lower emissions. So maybe you can try to now guess what are the different assumptions that we must have taken into consideration. Okay, so we have lower transportation distances. Yes, this makes a difference. The lesser the distance, you would have lesser emissions. Recycle leather, yes, that's also a great answer. So when you recycle leather, you would not consider the emissions from the first cycle, but rather focus on the recycling part only. Where the materials are coming from, yes, exactly. So also related to the transportation distances, use of lower emitting energy sources, change of materials, fully organic, okay, is supplies using energy, brand based in Europe, byproduct main material, regenerative agriculture. Leather is a byproduct, so the emissions are counted where the main product was used, the use of the product. Okay, so here we are mainly focusing on S3C1. So all the emissions that you see is mainly related to the production of the product only. The breeding farms are closed, leather is recyclable, and the emissions are based on whole life cycle. Okay, let's see, let's give a few more seconds for everyone to finish typing. Okay, so we can move on to the three scenarios that we have modeled. So the first scenario is looking this way. So you must be thinking, how can scenario one be possible? How can leather jacket have lower emissions than the dress and the cotton t-shirt? So in this scenario, the jacket that Mummies Limited produce is actually made from old car sets. So some of you did say that it comes from recycled leather. So yes, that's the right assumption. So the supplier of Mummies Limited, what they do is they go to scrap yards and collect the leather from luxury cars that are about to be recycled. Then what they do is they transport using electric vehicles and process it in their factory, which is in France. And this factory is completely powered using solar panels, wind farms, and batteries, all located and controlled by the supplier. So that is also right. Some of you said there were the transportation distances were shorter, and they use also renewable energy sources in the factory. And another assumption that we have is they collect all the materials from scrap yards, which are located less than 100 kilometers from the headquarters. Therefore, again, the end-to-end operations for making the jacket is hyper-localized. And some of you did say that the transportation distances are quite low, and that's why emissions are lower. That is also correct. Now, the leather has already been accounted for when producing the car. So therefore, it does not need to be accounted again in the second life cycle, as it is in effect a waste material that would have otherwise been burned. So what you would account for here exactly is the emissions of collecting leather, processing it, and then also transportation, which is involved in the intermediate steps of processing. So let's go to scenario 2, and you would think, how can this be possible? Because there's another scenario here where we see leather jacket has higher emissions. Well, what Ansuk Namun does here is she uses her influence skills to convince the suppliers to actually give her data about the actual amount of material used for producing each product. So now she has activity data for both leather and cotton, alongside the supplier data that she collected previously for the leather jacket. However, her supplier in China does not share any data. So during the course of investigation, she also finds out that she was actually lied about the recycled leather products. And in reality, only 1% of the jackets come from recycled car seats. Therefore, through sustainability data, she discovers fraud in the supply chain. Now, there's another scenario here. In this scenario, what Ansuk Namun has done is she has put in quite an effort to supplier engagement and has collected quarterly data from her supplier on the platform. And due to the fraud that was detected with the leather jacket suppliers, she has now limited her leather collection to only a few hundred items. and has decided that average-based method is good enough for that purpose. And her main focus would be now on selling the polyester dress and the cotton t-shirt. So what you see from all these three scenarios, an example is that sustainability data becomes de facto business analytics, and it is embedded in financial decision making, driving company strategic value. And here I would like to wrap up all the modeling scenarios and hand it over back to Dr. Dzhiordzhio.
Thank you, Larry. And if we can move on to the next slide. So, and just to remind everyone, please add your questions throughout the Q&A session. And you can see here how perfectly aligned and ready we were for this masterclass, because you can see the answer of test that I inputted on this question a mere hour ago. So what we really want to hear from you is many of you might already be experiencing common problems that you have faced in supplier engagement data. Maybe you have tried to do it. And what we would really like to hear is either some of the common problems that you have already faced, or for those of you who haven't taken that step yet, some of the potential problems that you can foresee. And we hope that the example that we gave you with Aung San Suu Kyi's journey really was about the day-to-day life of a sustainability manager, which many of you on the call probably are. So a lot of the challenges that we explained, you might have already faced. So do please share some of those findings, or you might face them in the future. We already have populated answers. Great. Supply data entry fatigue. That is an excellent one. As we can imagine in Aung San Suu Kyi and in your day-to-day life, you might be working on hundreds of products with potentially thousands of suppliers. And the lack of standardization could perhaps make it challenging to really engage with your entire supply chain. The supplier of suppliers, of course, it's a combination. As you can see on the previous slide, the data flow is two-directional as well. Multiplicity of tools used to collect, confusion of units due to poor scientific understanding. That is an excellent point and something that is very close to our scientific hearts, and actually to most of the people working on the product side in Plan A, because we've spent a lot of time trying to help clients deal with exactly some of those specific issues. Great data quality. Yep. I mean, that's pretty reflective, I would say. And Larry, if we can move on, thank you all for sharing, and please keep the questions in the Q&A open. And what we wanted to share with you is you're all right, supply chain engagement and actually truly understanding the real life emissions of the products that we either buy ourselves or you're involved in producing in some shape or form. It is really complicated. But what we wanted to wrap around in this masterclass, and almost the final few words before we jump into the Q&A section, is, well, at the moment, a lot of global policies are not just incentivizing Scope 3 decarbonization, but are actually making it a default. So what we expect will happen in the future is we've just labeled a few of the policies that are currently relevant for a lot of brands in the fashion sector. And if we look at some of them around fashion and sustainability, so CSRD, CSDDD, eco-design, digital product passport, really they have a different flavor around sustainability, and they would effectively make companies take different actions. But in the core of them, and what you see here, Mickey Mouse doing on the screen, is the common thread is that for all of them, the long regulatory arm of the law would effectively make Scope 3 disclosure, target setting, and also decarbonization mandatory by default. So really the choice that actually all brands face at the moment is what methodology you choose and how that fits your business model really nicely, and how does it fit your data collection practices. And in a metaphorical sense, you reap what you sow. As Aung San Suu Kyi would probably say. And as Ari and Larry have very eloquently explained and talk us through the journey, there is not necessarily right answer. It's very unique to your business, and you can start at any point of the journey. If we think back of the analysis that we did, some of the brands at the moment, even the major ones, have not yet reported or disclosed their Scope 3 emissions. So even some of the bigger brands are still some of them are starting their sustainability journey to that level of granularity at the moment. So whatever part of the sustainability journey you are on, there's a tailored solution that would help fit your needs and your use case. So thanks, Larry, for the final slide. And this is where we wanted to wrap. 1 second, just before so we complete wrap up. Thank you very much. Is we wanted to summarize the 3 key points and lessons we learned today before we have the discussion and the Q&A. So the first one is that throughout history, civilization was able to sustainably produce clothes that have survived the tests of time. And we can really learn from those principles and leave a better world for the next generation. And actually sometimes by looking through history, how people did things in the past, you can even be inspired in modern days about how you can implement and change your operation and way of working. History is a surprisingly effective teacher, and we can learn a lot from those really inherently sustainable practices of the past. So the second one, next slide, please. Beautiful, thank you. The second one is really the pragmatic lesson. So as we've guided you through today and discussed, you have several carbon accounting options with regards of how you actually measure, report, and disclose your emissions. And all of those really are dependent on the data you have available, the processes, sometimes even the expertise that you have in-house. You might need supplemented expertise from experts like us or in other specific fields that are relevant for your business. And what our advice always is you should pick the one best suited for your business model and gradually improve over time. The overall principle that it holds true across the different methods is that the more granular data that you have, the more informed business decisions you can make. And also the better and more insightful board presentations you can make for your executive team or detailed discussions you can have as a sustainability team yourselves. And you also learn a lot about your business. So as we talk through, as Larry gave you the examples of fraud being detected, you can think that sustainability data is a way, through sustainability data, you're creating a digital representation of how your business actually works in real life throughout your supply chain. So if we go to the final lesson, which for us is the most important one, is it probably sounds as a provocative thought in a fashion masterclass, but purely from a technical and science perspective, there's truly not necessarily a sustainable material, because every product is a unique mix of many processes and materials involved. So how you make sustainable materials is understanding what are the associated emissions with each part of that process, and then trying to optimize and minimize the impact that each process has on the real world. So if we go to the final slide, and here to wrap up the masterclass, what we have done for you is we've mapped out all the services you would actually need to measure, report, and reduce the emissions working with your value chain. And Planning and our ecosystem of partners, really what we do is tailor your sustainability journey based on the individual needs of your business. So in my eyes, if you ask me, you're all scientists, because sustainability is a journey of continuous learning from failure a lot of the time, because you try something, you realize it didn't quite work as you expected, like Aung San Suu Kyi found out in our example. And it's a process of perpetuous and continual optimization. And with this, we leave the choice in your hands, and hopefully we can support you going forward. So do reach out to us as we wrap up the masterclass. But if you really want to know more about how we can support your business, as you can see, we cover the full end-to-end life cycle emissions on how you measure, report, and reduce the emissions associated with your business practices. My colleagues will post, I'm sure, links in the chat through which you can book demos or talk through many of the experts that we have in Plan A about how Plan A can help, or how our platform and services can really help you lead the sustainability journey at whichever business you're working in whichever location, Paris, Barcelona, Bangladesh, whichever part of the world you're based in. And on this point, we will go with the final interactive session. What we really wanted to close this workshop, and before we jump into the Q&A, well, I'll pass over some questions to Ari and Larry and answer myself. we really wanted to hear from you what inspired you today, and actually based on the topics that we've covered, what would you like us as experts to really cover in future masterclasses? So you can be as specific, as detailed as possible, or go bigger picture and really tell us what you would find valuable on masterclasses going forward. And we will take all of that feedback because we really value your engagement. And what we promise to do is develop more sessions going forward to explain and demystify the full end-to-end sustainability journey for you as a manager, client, or even as a consumer. Because what I've learned from Larry and Ari today is that I'm much more attentive to what my clothes are made out from, and I'm much more grounded. So I've personally gained something from the session today. Okay, so what we have, how to convince leadership to invest in emissions calculation reduction. That is a great question. We offer some tailored advice on the Plan A side for our customer excellence success team. So we have lots of experts guiding you and helping you with that, because that is often one of the most difficult challenges, is really the in-house sustainability politics, as it were, because that brings us to the core of the effort of how businesses function, and brands, companies as well. Best practice to communicate sustainability efforts to the public. That is another great shout. We are working with some behavioral scientists, so we'll think about how we can take some of the lessons learned. Particularly, there was lots of great experiments, sadly, during COVID times, of behavioral science and how you communicate really difficult scientific topics with the public. So we'll think if we can find some inspiration for future sessions. How to automate emissions calculations. I would just say, please book a demo. We'll talk you through that. Decarbonization progress, frequency of calculations, +1 on the demo. Supplier fatigue on the sustainability journey. That's a great one. So the trends that I'm seeing is that people are generally, at the moment, we're seeing two themes. One is around supplier engagement. The other is more about internal communication, leadership, and external communication with the public. Brilliant. Okay. So I think that's probably, please feel free to add any final points. Yep, supply chains, communication. Okay. Your message has been received loud and clear. We will definitely consider these topics for the next masterclasses, and we'll try to prepare some expert advice and information. And if we can now move on, we have around 10 minutes for the Q&A. And what I will do, please again go back to Slido, add your questions. And what I will do is go through them very tech savvy on my phone, and then pass them over to Ari and Larry. So to begin with, let's see. So the first one is, what's the best way to collect data from suppliers? Probably I can answer this one before passing the technical questions to Ari and Larry. Usually, and this is also a service that we offer from Plan A, is in very simple terms, you can think of it as questionnaires, but it really depends on what your existing relationship with your suppliers is. So if you already have some existing data flows, financial data, other types of data that you share with your suppliers, you would always begin with a conversation of what works for you and your business. And what we offer in Plan A is effectively a tailored module through which you can really engage with your suppliers on specific topics related to sustainability, because it really nicely crafts the data that you would need for your sustainability journey. But overall, it's very dependent on which supplier you're targeting. And the approach that we always advise in Plan A is to first understand your emissions and probably begin with the biggest hotspots that you have in terms of either the highest emitting products or the highest emitting materials. So you can really focus your efforts on where your company could have the biggest impact in reducing its emissions. So we're not saying don't engage your full end-to-end supply chain. As I mentioned in my previous slide, regulation will make that a default. So in maximum 5 years' time, every large brand will have to do it. So really, it's a choice, and it's a stakeholder engagement process, but we have some tools that can help you. So next one is, I would say to Ari, bringing on the data from some of the analysis that we did, we have a question on, do you know what calculation methodologies most fashion companies use? I think we answered that, but you can add a bit more context. And the person is asking, if I'm starting the sustainability journey of our company, is it okay to use spend or average based?
Thank you, Dr. Yes, as we showed, and also as a result of your polls, we saw that the most used currently is the hybrid method, which is actually a great news. This means that companies are able to communicate with their suppliers and collect at least part of the data, which I guess could be very important also in having like a good relationship with your suppliers. And what is not covered by the information that your supplier has provided can be covered, as we mentioned, with the average-based method, which is basically having like a database on informations on what are the general industry averages that allow for a pretty accurate way of assessing your emissions. And to the second part of the question, I would add that definitely if you are starting right now your journey, spend-based, as I said, is an amazing way to have a first assessment, a screening, a way to understand where should you begin. But it is definitely not a place where to stop. It should be just a great motivation to continue and strive for better data. And going towards average-based method. Average-based method is definitely a good method to understand and dive a bit deeper. In that way, you can understand the emissions that are coming from the specific products that you have, the materials that you use. How can you also leverage changing the materials, and also some actions could already stem from that method. And as we said, the journey is never stopping, and you can only improve, but that is also something that comes naturally. The more you dive into the data, the more you will see how it comes natural to go deeper into it. But definitely there is a journey into going ahead from let's say increasing into the accuracy. And anyway, it's good to start. Every method is better than not accounting these emissions at all, because they're so relevant that they really need to be accounted for.
Thank you, Ari. And as a reminder on the policies, those emissions would have to be recorded because policy will demand it in any case. And I actually used to work in policy and as a regulator previously, and I know for a fact that regulators in Europe, the US, the UK, pretty much around the globe are now looking at not just how to make companies disclose, but actually incentivize them, and how do you effectively either use a carrot or a stick approach so that companies can decarbonize their supply chain. And some of the questions that you have are brilliant on circular economy. Actually, some of the, we had one of our first masterclasses on fashion covered some of those elements on sustainability and how fashion, whether it's expensive or not. And really appreciate one of the comments on being a supplier, we're dealing with scope 1 and 2 on carbon neutrality journey. Awareness is less here, need some quick materials to promote knowledge on carbon accountancy. So I'm hoping that through the knowledge session today, you have that and you can reuse the materials that we've generated for you today. So the next question I want to pass over to Larry is, based on your experience, out of all of the GHG emission categories, which ones would you say are the most challenging in terms of data collection?
Yeah, so when you talk about GHG categories, I mean, you can talk also broadly about scope 1, 2, and 3. Well, scope 1 and 2 is fairly easier because often you have control over the data on scope 1, 2 categories. But when it comes to scope 3, among the 3 scopes, of course, scope 3 is often the most challenging. And if I had to pinpoint one of the categories within scope 3, of course, I think I would say category 1, because I mean, when you're purchasing goods and services, you have, if not hundreds, thousands of suppliers. And to collect data from all these suppliers is quite complicated. And after you receive data in different formats, it's usually on different systems, also from different departments. So yeah, category 1 is often very complicated. And also when you have suppliers based in different locations, you can receive data in terms of different units. Sorry, I'm getting a bit more technical here. So yeah, I would say it's often category 1 that is the most complicated.
Thanks, Larry. And that's a great segue. As I mentioned previously, that's where what we've done on our side is do the really technical scientific work to try to help you with those and demystify and standardize. So we offer solutions for various use cases. And actually, exactly on this point, there is a great question. I'll revert back to you, Larry, because we have discussed this very extensively in the last few months. We have a question from one of our audience members. If I incorporate PCF, that's product carbon footprint for everyone on the call, into my corporate carbon footprint, CCF. So if I incorporate a PCF into my CCF, will the accuracy of my calculations improve, and how?
Yeah, so often this is the case. So when you calculate, like Ari said, and also through the examples that I showed you, spend-based methodology is usually less accurate. So when you incorporate PCFs into your corporate carbon footprints, what you do is usually you have primary data directly from your suppliers through which you calculate product carbon footprints. So you would either use LCA software or use databases to model these emissions and create a PCF, right? So when you have supplier-based emissions to the PCF, it's of course more accurate because you have data that relates directly to the processes that are going on in your supply chain. So yes, it improves the accuracy of your calculations.
Brilliant. Thanks, Larry. And not only improves the accuracy, but it allows you to take better business decisions. So I will cover the one on regulations. So one question was, will spend/average methodology allow me to report and comply with regulations, even not as accurate? Yes. So at the moment, how most regulations are designed is, at this moment in time, they may not specify a specific method, but as I mentioned previously, from having had conversations with some of the regulators and policymakers in this space, we predict and expect that whilst in the next few years, maybe 3, 4, 5 years, supplier and average and spend-based would be sufficient, we would expect that slowly to turn. So policies will also evolve themselves. So in the future, the majority will most likely be, or the requirements will be for hybrid or supply-based. And I'll combine two questions because they're brilliant. One of them is insetting and working with my supplier. Is insetting and working with my suppliers our best chance to reduce our overall emissions? And the second one is, do you work with strategies to compensate carbon footprint? And before I pass the next question to Ari, let me just respond to this one. So yes, we would generally advise all of our clients that insetting strategies are best, and insetting and offsetting, the difference is insetting, you work with your supply chain to reduce emissions directly. Offsetting is effectively you pay for emissions to be offset through a project somewhere where you're given a lovely photo and a story about the evaluation and real world impact. But our advice is always, whilst offsetting projects may work in real life, it's much more difficult to actually evaluate them. So we always recommend insetting. And we have a minute left. So very quickly, Ali, last question. Any advice for calculate more dynamic real-time data to inform decision-making rather than calculating retrospectively? I think this is more broad terms with data collection.
Yes, definitely. It's not as easy always. It requires resources, but what we do, of course, is trying to enable the calculations in real time through the collection of data. So putting effort into having your data as well organized as possible, as straightforward as possible, and as clean as possible allows us to enable calculations fast and enable, of course, the collection of insights from these calculations in order to then guide your decision making in the best way possible. But it is a very big topic that probably requires a whole other masterclass.
Brilliant. And on that note, we would like to thank for your participation, and we'll close the event here. And I would like to thank Jean-Pierre for the compliment on the subject for sense making to our colleagues on the call. Brilliant. Thank you all. Hope you really enjoyed this session, learned a lot. We certainly learned a lot from you. Please keep us posted and do engage with us about how we can help you on your sustainability journey. And we look forward to engaging even on further deep dives across sustainability topics going forward. Thank you all. We wish you a brilliant day, evening, or lunch, wherever you are.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.